Aussie Mark here. Today we're having a look at a rather unusual knife which is put out by the Columbia River Knife and Tool Company, more commonly known as CRKT. And this is the NIRK, the N-I-R-K, which is a rather weird name for a knife, but I'll explain how it got that name. It's designed by a gentleman called Glenn Klecker, and the idea of this design is to follow a design principle called irreducible complexity. Now that talks about making a device from the least amount of parts possible, in other words making it as simple as you possibly can. Irreducible complexity means that if you take one of those parts away, the device will no longer function. So the name NIRK, the N stands for Nathan, which is Glenn Klecker's son, as I understand it. The IR comes from irreducible, in the irreducible complexity, and the K stands for knife. So that's how it got that rather odd name. This knife comes in a couple of versions. In the basic version that you see here in front of you, this is a satin finish with a plain edge blade. It's also available in a black oxide finish, and it has a partially serrated blade. I see that they're expanding this line of knives to a couple more models, and also there's a version of this which is what you call, I guess, a semi-custom. It was one of the other knife makers at CRKT did a custom version of this, and now they've brought a production model out. It's got blue anodized highlights, and it runs some kind of a bearing system on the pivot, which is probably not a bad thing, because the pivot on this is a little bit ordinary, to say the least. However, in doing so, it kind of moves away from the design principle this knife was designed around. So this basic version is probably the most pure form of this knife. We'll go through some of the features and how this thing works. Just wind back a bit there. There's not a lot of parts in it, as mentioned. Just get rid of that out of the way. The way this works, it's a lockback design. Now, the whole handle, with the exception of that clip, is one piece of steel. And what's really intriguing, if you look here, you can see how it's been milled out or water jetted, or however they do it. I should mention the handle material is in fact it's free CR13, and the way it works, really, this is what intrigued me. If you watch at the back, if I push down there, you'll see how that front part lifts up. So that then allows you to fold your blade, which of course that's your little lock there. When you fold that back up, I'll try and get this to focus. As it comes in, and it locks in like so. Now, it looks weak, but when you're holding the knife, because you tend to hold it like that, if you thumb on it, the blade really can't go anywhere. So it's actually quite okay. I was intrigued, and still am, by the calculations that must have gone into figuring out exactly how to design that shape, etc., to actually get that to work. I think it's really quite interesting. As I say, one piece of steel which has been cut and then bent to shape. You can see there how it's got that section there where it's bent over, and also at the front. At the back, this section here has been bent over. You can see against the back, so that gives it basically the spacer at the back. So the entire handle is one piece. Really quite an intriguing thing, and I guess it's modern machinery, CNCs, water jets, whatever allows you to do that type of thing now. Alright, we'll talk about some specs on the knife. As mentioned, a lockback, but it's certainly not just standard sort of lockback. The blade steel on this one is 2CR13. It is a hollow ground blade. As you can see there, it's a very attractive drop point shape. I actually really like the blade shape on this. It's a very practical blade shape. It's got lots of belly to it, and not much not to like as far as that goes. The blade length is 3 1/8 of an inch, or 79 millimeters. The length of the knife opened, as you see there, 7 5/8 of an inch, or 195 millimeters. If we close the knife up, it brings it down to 4 1/2 inches, or 79 millimeters. As mentioned, the handle material is steel, but it's a different steel to the blade. The blade is 2CR13, the handle is 3CR13. What's the difference? No idea, I haven't looked it up. If you really want to know, Google it, I guess. The weight of this thing, heavier than you might think, given the design, but I guess that's probably because it's basically all steel. It comes in at 3.7 ounces, which is 104 grams. Now the deployment on the knife, I sort of touched on this earlier, that the upscale version's got this U-Butte bearing race. The deployment is pretty ordinary. It feels like it's got sand in it, or it's scratching. I think that's because it only runs 2 steel washers, and I'll try and bring up and stay quiet and you'll be able to hear it. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but you can probably hear that slight scratchiness. It certainly feels that way. But it deploys one-handed, and it's okay. Really, with this button being down the back, it's pretty hard to close it one-handed. It can be done, but it's not very practical. Clip on this, you can see there the clip's bent, or in a curvature there to match the knife, and there's no mounting point on the other side. If it was, you'd need a different, well actually, sorry, there is a mounting point on the other side, but it's on the pivot screw. But due to that clip being bent that way, it won't work on that side of the knife. So basically, very unusual for me. This is not a left-hand carry option. This is a right-hand carry, and it's a tip down. Again, unusual for me as a left-hander to buy something like this, but I bought this purely as a collectible, as a kind of a design study, I guess, if you like. It was just something that a little bit different. Very cheap knife too. I think it only cost about $15 or $16 or something. So just something to have in the collection. Quality on it, well, for what it is and the way it's made, I think the quality is good and the value is good. As I mentioned, very cheap knife. I don't see this, to be honest, as a practical knife. It's not particularly comfortable in hand. I wouldn't like to use it for long periods of time. It does tend to dig in, particularly down around here and even on the top edge. And again, this part here digs into the hand. It's quite noticeable, which is a bit of a shame in a way, because the blade shape, put that blade shape on a foldable different handle, terrific stuff. I really like the blade shape a lot. So I really see this knife as not a practical user knife or an EDC knife. Some people might disagree and like it for that purpose, and more power to them, but for my purposes, I don't think it's really suitable for that. It to me is really, as I mentioned, just an interesting design, and it'll be just a collectible that'll live in my collection. I don't expect to give it any real use. So yeah, if you're looking for something just that bit different, that bit unusual for your collection, you could look at picking one of these up. They're cheap, and it's an interesting talking point when you get together with fellow knife people and want to talk knives, because I don't know that many people have probably got one. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Actually, what we might do before we tune out, let's see how many parts are in this thing. If I dig out the toolkit here, let's just see how many parts there are. Now, I know the website talks about only having 3 parts, so what we'll do, dig out the tools, find the right Torx bit. It is put together for Torx bit, and I'll edit this in. I won't bore you to tears when we pull it apart, but we'll pull it down and have a look and see how many parts are actually in this thing. Alright? Okay, so there it is, the NERC pulled down into its component parts. Thought I'd just edit that in rather than bore you guys to tears watching me pull it down. It's actually 7 pieces altogether. You've got your handle, blade, the 2 parts of the pivot screw, and there's 2 steel washers, and of course the clip. A couple of interesting design features that I noticed on this. The screw that comes out of the right side of the knife, quite an interesting shape, and there's a flat portion on the top, or 2 flat portions actually. I'll just grab a pointer. You can see there's a flat portion just there, which is for the clip. So when it goes through the pocket clip there, get that through. Let's see on the back, fiddly little thing, sorry about that. You can just see on the back there how that locks in. Now what that means is if you do decide to take the pocket clip off, because it's got the extra recess, it'll still mount into the knife. The other flat section just there is when it comes through the other side of the handle scale. You can see there a matching part there, so that prevents that pivot nut, if you like, from rotating around. And the other one is just that little screw which mounts through like that. So yeah, there's not a lot to it. All we've got to do is put it back together. I won't bore you to tears with making you watch that. Alright, so I'm just finishing up reassembling the NERC. Went together reasonably easily, didn't put up too much of a fight. That's about how it was. What I did have to do was just to get the washers and the blade back in, I just used a screwdriver and kind of turned it just to spread those 2 sides of the handle, and that allowed me just to slip that in. And then whilst I was trying to put all that together, I just put a little spike down through there just to hold everything in place. And the way to do it had to be done closed up so I could manoeuvre everything and adjust it, but it went together quite easily. I just check that tension. Don't think that's too bad. Yep, deploys just as scratchily as it did before, so I guess I put it together properly. Right, so that's it. That's the my review of the CRKT NERC. As I say, really unusual knife. Some people might like to carry this as an EDC. I'm not one of those people, but perhaps some people like this kind of thing. They just like it because it's a cool thing to have. I see it really as a collectible. Alright guys, again, thanks very much for watching, and hope you enjoyed the video. Take care. See you all again next time. Bye bye.